Did you know that Deco didn't know that Araujo was going to Liverpool? He found out through Fabrizio Romano. And the fight he started in the Barca offices was about to end with his time as sporting director. Stay, because what Laporta did to calm him down, no one expected. On Sunday morning, Ronald Araujo left Barcelona with his bags on his way to Liverpool. His own teammates found out through social media. There was no dismissal, there was no prior notice, there was nothing to anticipate that the Uruguayan midfielder, who had repeated to the satiety that he wanted to stay in Barca, was going to take a plane to England before most of the club knew what was happening. The FC Barcelona sporting director, the man whose job is to know each movement of the club's market before it happens, the one who has to manage the entrances and exits of the squad with the correct information, at the right time, that man read on Twitter what his own president had closed without telling him. What happened next in the offices of Barca was one of the most tense conversations that the two have had since Deco arrived at the club. And according to us, from the environment of both, the tension reached a point that no one inside the club expected to reach. Deco called Laporta, or Laporta called Deco. The versions differ in that detail, but what no one argues is that the meeting took place and that what Deco said at that meeting left Laporta in a very uncomfortable position. Deco told him that he could not work like that his function as sporting director was impossible to exercise if the president closed operations of the magnitude of the Araujo session without communicating it in advance enough for him to be able to manage the consequences. That he had discovered the news by an Italian journalist on social media before anyone at the club called him, and that this was not a matter of protocol or forms, it was a matter of professional respect that directly affected his ability to do his job. And then Deco said something that Laporta did not expect to hear. That he was thinking about it. That if that was the way the relationship between the president and the sporting director was going to work, he had serious doubts about whether it made sense to continue in office. Laporta heard all that in silence. He let Deco finish. And when Deco finished, he asked him to listen to him before making any decision. He explained to him why he had not notified him. The operation with Liverpool had advanced at a speed that no one at Barca anticipated completely. The English club really wanted Araujo. They wanted to sign him, but they couldn't do it now because they were exceeding the limits of financial fair play and they needed a session first. The agreement is that Araujo goes on loan until June and that Liverpool pays $55 million next year to make it final. The English club also assumes the full stake of the player, which is one of the highest in the squad. A huge salary relief for Barca at a time when the club needs money to close other operations. Deco heard all that and began to understand the logic of the operation, although that did not eliminate his discomfort with the way it had been managed. But then Laporta told him something else, something that he had kept for that exact moment, something that he knew he was going to need to say at some point in that conversation and that he had waited to say until Deco had heard everything else. He told him that Araujo's departure was not a problem without a solution, that he already had the solution, that he had been working on it for days in parallel with the negotiation with Liverpool, and that he had reached a personal agreement with the player he wanted to replace Araujo before the transfer was made official. Deco asked him who it was and Laporta pronounced the name. Aymeric Laporte. Deco did not expect that name, he did not expect it at all. Laporte was at the Athletic Club of Bilbao, the Franco-Spanish midfielder who had been one of the great revelations of the World Cup 2026 with Spain, the one who, along with Pau Kubarski, had formed the best pair of midfielders in the tournament, the one who, with Spain champion of the world, had shown that at 32 years old, he still had the level to compete in the elite of European football in the most demanding way possible. And the name that Real Madrid also had on its list. The White Club had been analyzing for weeks the possibility of signing Laporte as a reinforcement of his defense, and Barca had advanced with a personal agreement closed before Madrid made any official move. Deco processed all that in a few seconds, and his answer, according to us, was one that does not need many words. He remained silent and then said that changed things. It changed things because Laporte was not a substitute for Emergencia. He was a world-class midfielder who had just won the World Cup with Spain, who had been chosen in the best 11 of the tournament, the one who, with Spain champion of the world, had shown that at 32 years old he still had the level to compete in the elite of European football in the most demanding way possible. And Barca had it, with the personal agreement closed, without anyone in the market knowing that negotiation had taken place. Deco asked Laporta how he had achieved that agreement without anything transcending, and Laporta explained to him that the meeting he had had with Laporte and his family during the World Cup had given rise to a conversation about the future that at that time seemed informal, but that in reality was the first stone of a negotiation that both knew could move forward if the circumstances aligned. The circumstances aligned when Liverpool appeared for Araujo. Laporta understood at that time that he had a double opportunity: sell Araujo well, with an income of 55 million guaranteed for next year, and sign Laporte with the money released from the salary mass and with the motivation of a player who wants to take the leap to the biggest club in the world at the time when his career is at the highest point it has ever been. The offer that Barca is going to present to the Athletic Club is 80 million euros, a figure that the Basque club will not be able to reject for a 32-year-old player with a one-year contract. And Laporte, who already gave the personal yes to Barca, will have the best club in the world waiting for him when that offer reaches the table of Athletic. Deco left that meeting convinced, not because the initial discomfort disappeared completely, but because he understood that what Laporta had built in silence during the last days was a market movement that he himself would have applauded if he had known it from the beginning. Barca is going to sign Laporte, the best central defender in the world, the European champion with Spain, the player that Madrid also wanted. And with Laporte, Barca is going to have something that no other club in the world has at the moment: 10 champions of the Spanish world on the squad. In the next few hours, Barca is going to present the official offer to Athletic, and when Athletic receives those 80 million, the negotiation is going to start. But the personal agreement with the player is already closed, and when the player wants to leave and the club that wants to sign him offers 80 million for someone with a one-year contract, the result of that negotiation usually has only one possible outcome. Barca will have Laporte, and Deco will have the central defender that his club needs, even if he has found out how he got here. Aymeric Laporte is 32 years old. He was born in Agen, France, grew up in Basque football, and his career is one of the most unique that European football has produced in the last 15 years, because it includes practically everything that a footballer can live. The glory, the injuries, the change of national team, Saudi Arabia, and now the Athletic Club, where this year he showed that his level had not disappeared, but he was waiting for the right time to show himself again. Laporte arrived at Athletic at the age of 16 from the lower divisions of the Biarritz. Athletic trained him, made him a professional, gave him the opportunity to debut in the first division at the age of 19, and for several years he was the most promising central defender of Spanish football before Manchester City paid 65 million for him in the 2018 winter market. At City he was one of the best central defenders in the world for 4 seasons: Premier League champion, FA Cup champion, and the knee injury that he had 5 months out in 2019, and that at the time seemed that could change the course of his career. He came back, and he came back well, because Laporte has something that very few players in his position have: the ability to return from a serious injury without losing what makes him different. Then came the Al Nassr, the Saudi League, a decision that many in European football interpreted as the end of his high-level stage. When a first-level player chooses Saudi Arabia before the age of 30, there is a part of the world of football that decides that this player has already ended his history in Europe. Laporte showed that this interpretation was wrong. He returned to Athletic Club, the club where he was trained, the club to which he had always said that he wanted to return at some point in his career. And at Athletic this season he did something that very few 32-year-old players with a step through Saudi Arabia could have done. He was called up for the World Cup 2026 with Spain. He played, and not just played, he was one of the best midfielders in the tournament. The World Cup 2026 was the stage where Laporte reminded the whole world what he is capable of doing when the context is right. Along with Pau Kubarski, he formed the pair of midfielders that gave Spain the defensive solidity it needed to reach the final and win the tournament. Kubarski at 19, bringing the freshness and aggressiveness of someone who still does not know fear. Laporte at 32, bringing the experience and calm of someone who has played Champions League finals and who knows exactly what he has to do when the game tightens. That combination worked perfectly. Spain received few goals. Their midfielders won the aerial duels they had to win. They did well with the ball in their feet at times when the team needed to circle from behind without the pressure of having to look for the long pass. And Laporte, in each game, showed that his passage through Saudi Arabia had not been an early withdrawal, but a pause that allowed him to reach the World Cup with his legs fresh and his head clearer than ever. Flick saw it all. He followed it game by game. And as they tell us from the environment of the Barca coaching staff, the conversation about Laporte began at the World Cup itself, when Flick asked his analysis team if they believed that a player with that profile could fit into the system he was building at Camp Nou. The answer was yes. Laporte has exactly the characteristics that Flick is looking for in a midfielder. The exit with the ball from behind, the ability to anticipate the opponent's moves before they happen, the speed enough to defend at a high line, and the leadership of someone who has played in the best teams in the world and who, when it comes to ordering things in the dressing room, knows how to do it with the authority given by the titles and the experience. With Araujo out, Barca needs that. Not just a midfielder who occupies position 11. It needs a midfielder who leads. When Pau Cubarsí has a difficult day, there is someone by his side who helps him manage that difficulty with the experience of someone who has already gone through those moments. Laporte is that player. And there is something worth saying about the historical dimension of his possible arrival at Barca. Laporte would be the 10th Spanish world champion in the FC Barcelona squad. 10 players who, in July 2026, lifted the most important trophy in world football with the red shirt of the Spanish team and who, next season, will try to do something similar with the Azulgrana shirt at the Champions League. That number has no precedent in the history of Spanish football. And Barcelona will be able to point out something that Madrid, with all its money, does not have. A squad built around the best tournament in the world. And there is something worth saying about Madrid in this context. Madrid wanted Laporte. He had been analyzing the possibility of signing him for weeks. A world champion centre-back, with experience in the Premier League, who could meet the needs of his defense. Madrid did not make any official offer. It was in the analysis phase, and while Madrid evaluated, Barca acted. Laporte spoke with Laporte at the World Cup. A conversation that at that time seemed informal, but that had behind the intention of sowing a seed. Laporte listened, and what he heard interested him enough so that when Laporta called him again, the answer was positive. The personal agreement was closed before Madrid knew that Barca had entered the negotiation. That is exactly what has happened this signing market over and over again. Barca moving in silence before Madrid can react. And there is something else that is worth adding about the situation of the athletic club and how they are going to manage this offer. 80 million for a 32-year-old player with a one-year contract is an offer that Athletic has to study very seriously. The mathematics of professional football are what they are. And 80 million in the arcs of Athletic is an amount that can finance several years of signings within its parameters. The negotiation is going to happen. And Barca enters that negotiation with the most important advantage that a club can have when it goes for a player. The yes of the player is already in the pocket. And that completely changes the position of Athletic. The Athletic club is going to receive the Barca offer in the next few hours. 80 million euros, written on paper, with the logo of FC Barcelona on top. And with the certainty that behind that offer there is a player who already said yes. That is not a comfortable situation for Athletic. Because Athletic has a club philosophy that has been more than 100 years being the basis of everything it does. The rule of signing only Basque players or trained in the Basque country is not an arbitrary limitation. It is the club's identity, what makes it unique in world football. And defending that identity when there are 80 million on the table and the player wants to leave requires a type of conviction that not all clubs have. Athletic has it, but it also has the accounts it has. And 80 million for a 32-year-old player with a one-year contract that wants to leave is a situation in which the club can defend its position for a while, but that in modern football usually has only one possible outcome when the player is committed to his destiny. Laporte is already committed to Barca. The personal agreement exists. The player wants to go. And Barca is going to present the 80 million so that Athletic has all the economic arguments on the table when it comes to making its decision. There is something worth saying about why Laporte wants to go to Barca now. Because the answer says a lot about the mental state of a player who at the age of 32 is still making decisions with the ambition of someone who still has important things to achieve. Laporte won the World Cup with Spain at the highest moment of his career since his best years at Manchester City. And after winning the World Cup, the question that any player with his credentials asks himself is what is the next challenge that is worth pursuing? Laporte's answer is the Champions League with Barca. The tournament he never won with Manchester City despite having been 4 seasons in the best team in Europe. The tournament where Flick's Barca has the ambition to compete until the end of this season with a squad that this signing market built with more intelligence and more coherence than any other in European football. That combination, the right challenge, the right club, the right moment is what makes Laporte at the age of 32 willing to leave Athletic and put on a big blue shirt to try to get what he missed at City. Flick knows it, and that's why he wants Laporte. Not only because of his technical characteristics, but also because of the mental state of a player who arrives with real hunger, who does not come to charge well and play comfortably. He comes to win the Champions League. There is something that is worth saying about Barca as a whole before closing this script. Laporte's arrival, if confirmed in the next few hours, closes a signing market that Barcelona will remember for years as the most complete and most intelligent the club has had in a long time. Gordon, Keke Bruno, Gvardiol, Calafiori, Taha Ali, Vecina, Jan Diomande, Jorge Salinas, Ibrahim Ravik, Jaminton Campas, Pickford, Julian Quinones, Carlos Mejia, Soteldo, Ryan Rocha, Robinho Jr., Patrick Berg, Gustavo Puerta, and now Laporte. 19 operations, 19 different stories, and in each of them Barca did something that the big clubs with more money did not know how to do. Move first, act in silence, and build a project that has more layers than the football world saw from the outside. Madrid signed names, Barca signed a project, and when the season begins that difference will be visible in a way that no market analysis can fully anticipate. Laporte in Camp Nou next to Pau Kubarski, the same couple who won the World Cup with Spain, in the club where the Champions League is expected, and with Flick on the bench who has been building this piece by piece for months. And there is something that is worth adding about the reaction that Barcelona will have when the official statement comes out. The perspective is this. Barca will start the 2026-27 season with the best English goalkeeper in recent years, with the two best sides in the signing market, with the youngest and most dynamic midfielder in La Liga, with extremes that can unbalance any defense in the world, and with a pair of central defenders formed by the best young central defender in Spanish football and the central defender who was chosen in the best 11 of the World Cup 2026. And he has 10 world champions in his ranks, 10 men who showed on the biggest stage of football that they are the best, that when there is maximum pressure and the whole world is watching, they respond. And there is something else about Laporte specifically that connects with Barcelona in a way that we have not yet mentioned. Laporte was formed in Basque football, grew up in a system that produces players with a character and a specific mentality. Basque teams do not sign stars, they train people. And the people they train have a way of understanding football that when they get to big clubs they take it with them as part of what they are. That in the Barca dressing room, which already has Pedri, trained in the Canaries, and Gabi, trained in the Marsella, is a combination that Flick will know how to take advantage of from the first training. Laporte in the Camp Nou. The world champion who reached 80 million and stayed because the project was worth more than any other option he had available.